Think of it this way. Buddhism begins as a fairy tale in reverse. Unlike Cinderella, or even any film we may see, where the underdog who has nothing, but then gains the whole world, typical story. In contrast, Buddhism is the story of someone who has everything and decides to give it all away. Some have referred to the story of the Buddha as the biggest midlife crisis ever recorded. It begins with a prince named Siddhartha who lives in a great, beautiful palace. This takes place during the time of Confucius in China, Pythagoras in Greece, and Siddhartha's abode is situated in the foothills of the Himalayas in Nepal. The prince's mother died, people suspect probably at childbirth, and although he may have an inkling or some sense of suffering, his father sees to it that the life in the palace is perfect, shielding his son from any suffering at all. This coddled prince seems to be enjoying life just fine. Access to exquisite culinary delights. He's got a beautiful wife, a beautiful son. But despite all this beauty, he starts asking questions, wondering where all of those roads from the castle, where do they all lead? He informs his father he wants to see the real world. So reluctantly, his father agrees, but tries to make the real world as clean and antiseptic as possible, much in the same manner that we do today by sweeping homeless people out of sight. And pretend there's really nothing wrong there at all. The father wants to make sure, because I guess he loves his son so much, that he's not exposed to any unpleasantries out there in the real world. But of course, we know that's impossible. So the father sends his son with kind of a guide out there into the world, and after a while, Siddhartha asks his guide, "What is that?" And the guide says, "A sick person. Each of us falls sick. You and I. No one is exempt from sickness." And then on another tour, he asks, what is that? And he is told, that's an old person. You know, each of us gets old, you and I alike. No one is exempt from old age. And on another outing, he sees a corpse. And he asks, what is that? And he is told, it's a dead person. Each of us dies. No one is exempt from death. On a fourth outing, Siddhartha sights a wandering ascetic, and the guy tells him he has left behind a spouse and family and job and home in search of spiritual liberation. Well, hence, at age 29, Siddhartha has his midlife crisis, finally looking at life through the prism of suffering, illness, aging, death. The prince, whose whole life had been so sheltered, decided there is more to human existence than profit and power, pleasure and prestige. And he goes forth from home to homelessness. After wandering for 6 years, he sits under a tree for 49 days, and awakening comes upon him. He saw all things as impermanent and ever-changing. He saw how we suffer because we wish the world were otherwise. We suffer because we wish the world were otherwise. So I think we need to stop right here and ask ourselves if we, sophisticated Unitarians in the modern world, are awake enough to identify the source of our own suffering as wishing the world were otherwise, wishing perhaps that we even had more treasures for ourselves. The Buddha, or the awakened one, felt he needed to help others achieve the enlightenment he himself experienced, and gathered some followers and delivered his first sermon, which was really like Buddhism 101. At the heart of it were the Four Noble Truths, which contain that universal religious formula: the problem we face, the solution, the techniques of getting from the problem to the solution. Life, he says, life is marked by suffering. There's the problem. Life is marked by suffering. But, and here's the great insight that he offers, suffering has an origin and therefore can be eliminated. So it's not just this existential, suffering is. He says, no, there's an actual point. It does have a beginning. There is an origin to suffering, and we can eliminate it. The path to eliminating suffering is the Noble Eightfold Path, in which meditation is paramount. So hopefully we can understand why Buddhism is far more receptive to modernity than Christianity. Buddhism teaches that human beings can solve their own problems. And when that happens, when we can solve our own problems, there is no need then for divine rescue or intervention, divine intervention, or any recourse of a supernatural world interceding here. Now, Buddhism can easily be open to science because it does not need to protect an old narrative, doesn't need to protect a mythology of how the world works that would then undermine its basic tenets. I believe that Buddhism is so popular in America today because it makes an inner life or an inner world accessible. Now, you can easily place your trust in science. Who cares? I mean, what matters is your own meditative work that you need to eliminate your suffering. What is so important to remember is that Buddhism emphasizes experience over belief. The Buddha, in fact, was a very practical man who likened his teaching to a raft. It's for crossing over. No miracles that defy natural law. You go from suffering to the release of suffering, as though on a raft. You go from one shore to the other shore. We much neglect our inner world and get caught up too easily in the razzle-dazzle of the material world of want, of having, where nothing ever seems to be enough. Even in yesterday's newspapers, it was all over, a whole new expose on the havoc wreaked by climate change, on our water here in Utah, on food supplies around the world. Even seeing this, it doesn't penetrate. We have trouble still changing our behavior because we still think it's all about satisfying our needs. So in this partnership between Emory University and Tibetan Buddhists, we find a helpful exchange of ideas. Science, according to the Dalai Lama, is highly developed in the material world, the external world. Buddhists work mainly in the realm of the internal world. He says, we need them both to be complete. External, internal's got to come together. We need them both to be complete. Last year, Buddhist leaders accepted science education as a mandatory part of their monastic education. It was the first major change in 600 years. They're making efforts to include new words in their vocabulary for concepts like photosynthesis, clones. There's no equivalent of that in the Tibetan language or culture. How does one begin to name thousands of molecules and chemical compounds? But they're loving it. They say that they understood impermanence as simply existing through their tradition. But now they get to understand it through the study of how fast particles decay. So they've always taught about everything is impermanent, and now they see it. Look at those particles just vanish away, just decay. Yeah, they love it. And scientists are now contemplating the science of the heart and mind in new ways. Scientists are looking at nature and the origins of consciousness through a new lens. Scientists are trying to quantify meditation and compassion, and thus they've developed something called cognitively based compassion, used to train for an improvement of empathy. Wow. Personally, I'd prefer meditation to cognitively based compassion. Leaves me cold. The external and the internal. We need both to be complete. The modern world, I fear, has, to a large degree, excluded the treasures and the richness of the internal world, eager to pursue gains for individual needs. And those needs, Buddhism teaches, lie at the core of our suffering. But we can, in fact, solve our problems ourselves through mindfulness that comes with meditation. On the whole, despite its origins dating back 600 years before Christ, Buddhism is a pretty modern way of thinking about the world and about life and about ourselves. And I am drawn to its simplicity. The story goes that when the Buddha was gathering his followers, he was absolutely peppered with all sorts of wild metaphysical questions. They didn't quite trust us at first, and they would ask him, is the world eternal? And they would ask him, are body and soul one and the same? On and on, these questions. And so the Buddha responded with a question of his own. He asked, if you were shot with a poisoned arrow, would you waste your time and breath by asking, who shot the arrow? How tall was he? What was his complexion? Or wouldn't you just pull the arrow out? Buddhism is about removing the arrow of suffering. All the speculation only adds to the pain. Religion that relies on speculation, these religions are having difficulties with the modern world. Buddhism, and let's include Unitarianism and all religious perspectives that do not rely on perspectives that do not rely on empirical evidence for truth, have an easy time embracing science and living compatibly with all that is new and evolving as we learn more and more about this beautiful, wonderful earth and the heavens. So be it.